She never loved you. She loved the reflection. And the worst part is, you helped her paint it. It never begins with a kiss. It begins with a look. She doesn't see you, she sees him. The one she's been scripting since girlhood. You're not a person. You're a projection. You're not chosen. You're cast. That flicker in her gaze. You think it's desire, but it's calculation. She's not falling in love with a man. She's falling in love with a character. At first, it flatters you. She says, "You're not like the others." But what she means is, you fit the role better. Carl Jung warned us, this isn't intimacy. It's illusion. When a woman hasn't integrated her unconscious masculine, the animus, she becomes possessed by it. And you become the stage for its performance. You smile when you want to scream. You nod when you disagree. You explain yourself before anyone even questions you. Not out of strength, but fear. Fear that if you stop performing, you'll stop being loved. But here's the brutal truth. She never loved you. She loved the mirror you held up to her dream. And when your truth cracks the illusion, she won't revise the story. She'll replace the actor. You'll feel hollow, confused, rejected. But you weren't rejected. You were released from a role you were never meant to play. This isn't betrayal. It's projection. And projection always collapses. Jung spent his life studying the unconscious, how we fall in love, not with people, but with our unmet needs wearing someone else's face. You were not seen. You were scanned. You weren't known. You were imagined. And now, you're disposable. So the question is no longer, what did I do wrong? The real question is, who am I without the mask? This is where most men run. Back to being nice. Back to being safe. Back to being chosen. But you're still here. Still listening. And that means something. It means a part of you is waking up. So breathe, not to calm down, but to wake up. Because what you thought was love was just a mirror. And the mirror never shows you your soul. But this moment isn't here to flatter you. It's here to confront you, to hold up the mirror and shatter it. Because the world taught you to seek her gaze. But Jung, he taught you to seek your own. And now the only question that matters is, will you stop performing and start choosing yourself? You think she's arguing with you? She's not. She's arguing with a ghost. A ghost stitched from memory, from wounds, betrayals, stories she never finished living. And now, you wear his face. Not because you are him, but because you're close enough to trigger the myth. Carl Jung called it the animus, the inner masculine image that haunts a woman's psyche when it remains unconscious. When she hasn't faced it, she doesn't choose men. She reenacts them. So when you speak from the heart, she hears accusation. When you set a boundary, she feels oppression. When you show depth, she calls it weakness. Not because of you, but because of him. The man who left, the one who lied, the one who silenced her mother's voice. You're not that man, but you remind her of him. And now you're cast in a role you never agreed to play. She isn't reacting to your truth. She's reacting to a shadow. And the cruel twist, she doesn't know she's doing it. Projection is unconscious. That's why it's dangerous. She truly believes you've changed, that you're not who she thought you were. But the truth is, you never were. You were just performing the role she assigned you. And when you stopped playing it, she didn't reflect. She recast. This isn't love. It's reenactment. You became the stage for her unfinished story. And the more you try to fix it, the deeper you sink. You think if you just say the right thing, She'll see the real you. But she's not listening. She's listening to the animus, that inner voice that whispers, no man is enough. No man is safe. No man is ever right. And unless she's done the work, that whisper becomes law. You could be kind, loyal, grounded, but if you don't match the myth, you become the enemy. And the tragedy, you try harder. You become nicer. You shrink your voice to make her feel seen. But the more you bend, the less she respects you. Because deep down, the feminine doesn't want a puppet. She wants a presence. Something solid. Something untamed. But when a woman is ruled by the animus, she doesn't crave presence. She fears it. So she tests it. She resents it. She tries to manage it. And every time you comply, you lose yourself. Until one day, you look in the mirror and realize you've been arguing with a fantasy. And losing, not because you were wrong, but because you were never seen. And this is the moment most men miss. They blame her, call her controlling, irrational, manipulative. But Jung would ask, what part of you agreed to play the ghost? Because if you don't ask that, you'll keep being cast in stories that were never yours. And the longer you stay, the more you disappear. So the choice is not about her. It's about you. Do you keep playing the part? Or do you walk off the stage? Not in anger, not in bitterness, but in sovereignty, because the moment you stop being her myth is the moment you start becoming your man. No man wakes up one morning and decides to betray himself. It begins quietly. You ignore a feeling. You swallow a truth. You say yes when your soul whispers no. You call it kindness. You call it maturity. But really, it's fear. Fear of not being enough. Fear of being too much. Fear that if you don't shrink, she'll leave. And in that fear, you begin the performance. You edit your words. You soften your edges. You mold yourself into something smooth, polite, easy to love. But what you've made is not a man. It's a product. And Carl Jung had a name for this. Self-betrayal. Not the loud kind. Not the kind that breaks trust in one big moment. No, this betrayal is quiet, subtle, daily. It hides in smiles that aren't real, in apologies that aren't yours to give, in boundaries you erase to keep the peace. And slowly, that peace becomes a prison, because a peace that demands your silence is not peace. It's obedience, and every time you shrink to be loved, you teach her how to ignore your truth. Every time you soften your spine to keep her calm, you show her how to bypass your soul. You don't lose her because you're unworthy. You lose her because she no longer feels anything. You made yourself predictable, manageable, safe. But Jung warned us, the feminine does not crave safety. She craves polarity, mystery, edge. You didn't lose her because you were wrong. You lost her because you became too easy to define. And what's fully defined becomes forgettable. You thought, if I just show her how different I am, if I just love her harder, she'll see me. But she didn't want more love. She wanted more fire. And you gave her warmth, but no burn. So now you sit there, confused, angry, hollow. You did everything right. You were patient, present, polite, and still she left. Why? Because the man she respected was the one who told the truth. Even when it was uncomfortable, the one who stood firm. Even when she pushed, the one who chose presence over performance. But you performed so well, you disappeared. And now, the question that haunts you isn't, why did she leave? It's when did I leave myself? And the answer, you don't remember. Because self-betrayal doesn't happen in explosions. It happens in whispers, in 1,000 little choices to be softer, safer, smaller, until nothing real remains. But here's the reckoning. You weren't born to be chosen. You were born to be known. Not for your mask, for your essence. And if that essence makes her uncomfortable, that's not failure. That's presence. That's power. Because the man who shrinks to be loved will always be loved for the shrinking, never for the being. And that kind of love, it burns fast, then flickers, then blames you for the ashes. So this is your moment. Do you keep bending? Keep performing? Keep seeking approval from a mirror that never reflected your soul? Or do you burn the script and stand, not to be loved, but to be real? Because no woman can ever fully see you until you stop hiding behind the man you think she wants. You thought being chosen meant you were loved. It didn't. It meant you were available when her fantasy needed a face. You thought her gaze meant intimacy. It didn't. It meant she found a new screen to project her dreams onto. She said, "You're not like the others." But what she meant was, you fit the role better. You thought you were the exception. You were just the next. Carl Jung warned us. When someone hasn't met their own soul, they borrow someone else's to feel whole, but they don't borrow you. They borrow your shape, your silence, your presence. You didn't even know the story, but you stepped into it like a man starved for meaning, because for a moment, it felt good to be wanted. And that's how the trap sets. It doesn't start with lies. It starts with praise. It starts with the words, every unformed man aches to hear, "You're different." But no one teaches you what that actually means. No one teaches you that when a woman hasn't faced her animus, she doesn't fall in love with men. She falls in love with the symbol. And when the symbol disappoints her, she doesn't reflect. She doesn't dialogue. She recasts. You didn't fail her. You simply stopped fitting the projection. And yet, you blame yourself. You ask, what did I do wrong? Nothing. You just stopped shrinking. Stopped softening. Stopped performing. You dared to show her the real you, unfiltered, unscripted, unapproved. And the moment you did, you broke the fantasy. You weren't loved. You were replaced. And that's the pain men carry but never name. The ache of being chosen, but never seen. You were celebrated for your compatibility, not your truth. You became a perfect fit for a role you never auditioned for. And when you finally stepped out of character, she didn't pause the play. She flipped the page, found someone else, started again. And you stayed in the silence, wondering what you could have done differently. But the real question is not, what made her leave? It's, what made you believe being chosen meant being loved? Because here's the deeper truth. You stayed because performance felt safer than rejection. You chose applause over authenticity, comfort over case, fantasy over reality. And in doing so, you vanished. That's the real betrayal. Not hers, yours. You agreed to be the mask. You smiled through the unease. You traded presence for approval. You weren't chosen for who you are. You were chosen for how well you hid. And when you finally stopped hiding, she saw something unfamiliar. She saw you, and it terrified her. Because the truth you carry can't be edited, can't be managed, can't be controlled. And if she's not ready to face her own shadow, she will run from yours. So now you stand at the edge of the stage, costume in hand, mask at your feet, and for the first time, you realize being chosen was never the goal. Being met was not for your performance, but for your presence. Not for your shape, but for your soul. And if she can't meet you there eye to eye, truth to truth, then let her go. Not in bitterness, but in gratitude, because she didn't betray you. She revealed you to yourself. And now, you're free. There comes a moment, not with drama, not with rage, but with silence. A moment when the illusion ends, and you're alone. Not just without her, but without distraction, without performance, without applause. Just you, breathing, blinking, remembering, trying to feel what it's like to simply exist without being watched. And in that stillness, something aches. Not because you lost her, but because you realize you were never fully there. Not as a man, as a mask, as a mirror. She didn't fall out of love. She fell through the fantasy. And all that's left now is space. The kind of space you used to run from. The kind you used to fill with words, smiles, comfort. But now it echoes. This is what Jung called the abyss. Not hell, not heartbreak, but the space between the persona and the soul, the death of who you thought you were, and the birth of who you might become. And it's terrifying, because all the things you thought made you lovable, your agreeableness, your softness, your careful masculinity, they have to burn. Not because they're wrong, but because they were never real. They were fragments, strategies, camouflage. And now the camouflage is gone. Now the fire comes. Not the fire of rage, the fire of purification. This is what Jung meant when he said individuation requires a kind of death, the death of the persona. You thought becoming a man meant adding more charm, more muscle, more lines to say. But it's the opposite. It's subtraction. It's surrender. It's standing in the wreckage of who you performed to be and deciding not to rebuild it. And it hurts. You walk into rooms you once found comfort in. They feel empty. You talk to friends and realize they only knew your mask. You see your reflection and wonder who you're meeting for the first time. This is why most men go back to performing, back to pleasing, back to being chosen. Because solitude feels like punishment when you've built your identity around being wanted. But Jung knew this isn't punishment. It's preparation. It's the space where illusions decay and truth emerges raw and unpolished. And if you survive this silence, not escape it, not numb it, but survive it, you earn something sacred. Yourself. Not the man she molded. Not the version the world approved, but the one who no longer begs to be seen. The one who no longer asks permission to exist. You don't smile to be liked. You don't shrink to be safe. You don't chase love like oxygen. You walk still, solid, sovereign. And the loneliness you feel now, it's not emptiness. It's space. Space for the man beneath the ashes to finally breathe. So if you're here, sitting in that silence, wondering if anyone will come for you, let me tell you, no one's coming. And that's the gift, because when you stop waiting to be saved, you become the man who saves himself. And from that moment on, you'll never again trade your soul for someone else's smile. There's a strange kind of power that comes not when you're loved, but when you no longer need to be. At first, it feels unnatural. You've spent your whole life thinking that to be a man is to be desired, to be pursued, to be chosen. But then the silence comes. Her name disappears from your phone. The validation dries up, and you wait for the ache to come. But instead, you feel something else. Peace. Not the peace of being comforted. The peace of no longer performing. You stop explaining. Stop softening. Stop apologizing for your presence. You just stand, and people around you feel it. Some shrink. Some resent you. Some call you cold, distant, too much. But you're not cold. You're clear. And clarity is terrifying to those who live in confusion. Carl Jung said, "The man who integrates his unconscious becomes whole." But wholeness is not comfort. It's confrontation. You've confronted yourself. Now, you don't chase. You don't charm. You don't negotiate with illusions. You don't seduce the spotlight. You walk through the world like a grounded flame. Not to be admired, but because you no longer fear being unseen. And something begins to shift. You notice. She starts looking at you again, not the woman who left, but the kind of woman who never noticed you before. But you don't bend. You don't return to the mask just because someone claps. You've learned, applause is not love. Attention is not respect. Obsession is not intimacy. You don't crave their gaze anymore. You command your own. You take up space in your own life without asking permission. And that's what makes you magnetic. Not the desire to be wanted, but the refusal to be molded. Because now, you don't explain your energy. You honor it. You don't dull your intensity to make others feel safe. You let it burn. Soft but untamed. And now, when she returns, and yes, she often will, it won't be because she sees you. It will be because she misses the role you once played. But you don't wear that costume anymore. You've burned it. So you don't bend. You don't audition. You don't flinch when she says, "You've changed." You smile, because yes, you have. You're no longer here to be a character in someone else's story. You're here to live your own. And if she can't meet you there with both feet, both eyes, both truths, you let her go. Not with bitterness, but with reverence. Because she was the storm that shattered your illusion. And now that you're awake, you'll never again betray yourself for the comfort of being accepted. This is what Jung pointed to. Not the alpha, not the nice guy, but the integrated man. The one who doesn't seduce, the one who doesn't submit, the one who simply is. Untouchable, not because he's hard, but because he's whole. And now, the paradox emerges. When you no longer seek love, the kind of love that seeks truth finally finds you. Not the woman looking for a character to complete her, but the one who has already burned her script. There's a kind of power that doesn't come from dominance, but from stillness. A stillness earned, not because you shut down, but because you stood up. Not because you stopped caring, but because you stopped bending. And now, people feel it. When you enter a room, it shifts. Not because you speak louder, but because you no longer need to speak at all. You don't demand attention. You create discomfort simply by being present. They fidget. They over-explain. They avert their eyes. Why? Because they can't read you. And what can't be read, can't be managed. You've become unpredictable. And unpredictable people scare those who survive by control. Carl Jung warned us. The individuated man, the man who has burned his persona, faced his shadow, walked the abyss and returned, whole would not be adored. He would be feared. Because he can't be guilted, can't be seduced, can't be manipulated. He doesn't flinch to please. He doesn't speak to perform. He doesn't choose to be liked. He chooses to be true. And that terrifies the world, especially women who have not met their own animus. To them, you feel dangerous. Not because you're violent, but because you're real. You don't mirror their fantasy. You reflect their chaos. Your silence becomes a threat. Your presence becomes pressure. Because you no longer wear a mask they can mold. You've stepped off the stage, and now you're holding the script. She can't edit you anymore. She can't assign you a part. You're not a projection. You're a mirror. And real mirrors don't flatter. They reveal. So when she looks at you now and flinches, it's not because you failed her. It's because your stillness reflects the noise she's been avoiding. And unless she's done her own work, she will run. Not because you're wrong, but because you're sovereign. And sovereignty, it can't be seduced. That's the price of power. Not being praised, being misunderstood, not being desired, being untouchable, not because you built walls, but because you dismantled your need to be accepted. You no longer argue with projection. You outgrow it. You don't respond to provocation. You see through it. You don't correct every false story about you. You let your presence speak for itself. And now, you don't posture. You don't chase. You don't prove. You walk like someone who remembers who he is. Not with flair, but with weight. And that weight, it creates silence. Not the kind that pushes people away, the kind that makes them choose. Because when a woman meets a man who no longer bends, she either walks away or finally sits beside him. No scripts, no stage, just presence. And the ones who haven't done their own work, they'll try to provoke you, to break you back into character. But they won't succeed, because you've already broken and rebuilt. So their chaos can't shake your center. Their confusion can't rewrite your peace. You've become what they never expected. Untouchable. Not by force, by freedom. And in that freedom, you stop being someone they can shape and start becoming someone they can only meet. And then one day, she arrives. Not the fantasy, not the muse, not the actress rehearsing her lines for the perfect love story. A woman, whole, awake, unafraid. She doesn't need to be adored. She doesn't crave attention. She doesn't orbit you in silence, waiting to be noticed. She simply stands beside you, still, certain, and in her silence, you don't feel tension. You feel recognition, not of past lives, but of past illusions finally burned to ash. She isn't chasing love. She isn't begging for certainty. She isn't calling you home to avoid her own loneliness. She's done the work. She's met her shadow, faced her animus, let go of the myth of the perfect man. That's why she doesn't try to shape you. She doesn't need to soften you to feel safe. She doesn't shrink you to feel bigger, because she isn't looking to be completed. She's looking to be met, eye to eye, truth to truth, silence to silence. And when she looks at you, she doesn't see a project. She sees a presence. She doesn't see potential. She sees a man, not a risquer, not a fantasy, but a sovereign soul carrying his own weight. She doesn't flinch at your silence. She respects it. She doesn't try to decode your depth. She sits with it, because it echoes something familiar, her own. And in that space, you don't feel the need to impress. You don't perform. You don't explain. You just are. And for the first time, that's enough. This isn't romance. This is reverence. This isn't possession. This is presence. You don't orbit each other out of need. You choose each other in freedom. You don't speak to escape silence. You speak because the silence is already sacred. And when you touch, it's not to soothe insecurity. It's to say, we made it. Through the fire, without losing ourselves. Most men will never feel this. Not because they're incapable, but because they never stop performing long enough to meet someone who doesn't need them to. Most women will never offer this. Not because they're broken, but because they're still casting men to fix a movie they're too afraid to stop watching. But she stopped watching. She started writing her own story. And when you entered, it wasn't to complete her. It was to walk beside her. Two flames no longer burning each other, but burning with each other. No masks, no myths, no management, just presence. Pure, uncompromised, unapologetic. And when it happens, you'll know. Because for the first time in your life, you won't feel chosen. You'll feel met. And that difference is where everything real begins. Let's tell the truth now. Most men will never get here. Not because they can't, but because they won't. They'll reach the edge where the fantasy ends and the mirror begins, and they'll turn back. They'll say it's too much. They'll call it toxic. They'll whisper, "I just want someone to love me." And who can blame them? No one taught them that love without truth is just performance. The world taught them to be charming, agreeable, safe, and they obeyed. They learned how to be liked, how to smile on cue, how to shrink just enough to fit the script. And it worked for a while. They got the attention. They got the praise. They got the girl. But late at night, when the room is quiet and the applause fades, they're hollow, because deep down, they know they were never really seen. These are the men who swipe endlessly on dating apps, not looking for connection, but looking for a stage. These are the men in quiet marriages where their voice left the room 5 years ago. These are the men in comment sections, blaming modern women for their loneliness, never realizing the role they played in disappearing. Because the truth is, they never came home to themselves. They spent their strength chasing affection from women who never met their own shadow. They confused attention with value, proximity with intimacy, desire with depth, and they paid for it. Not in heartbreak, in something worse, self-erasure. They traded their truth for acceptance. And slowly, they vanished. Carl Jung saw this before we did. He wrote, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. Even if it means dying in character. Even if it means being loved forever for someone they never truly were." And the tragedy, these weren't bad men. They were honest, loyal, loving, but they gave their truth away piece by piece for comfort. And in doing so, they disappeared. They became shadows of men, emotionally present, spiritually absent, smiling through resentment, listening through bitterness, pleasing through self-hate. And the women they chased, they didn't respect them, because the feminine never respects what it can fully control. And these men made themselves easy to control, and in return, they weren't loved. They were used, not maliciously, unconsciously, because when a woman hasn't faced her shadow, she doesn't need a man. She needs a mirror, and he volunteers every time. So here's the final truth. Most men won't arrive because arriving means letting go. Letting go of being liked. Letting go of being the good one. Letting go of the fantasy that love is guaranteed, if you're just nice enough. But that's not love. That's obedience. And Jung didn't write for obedient men. He wrote for those willing to stand alone, to burn the script, to walk through fire, to stop being someone else's idea of a man, and finally, become their own. So ask yourself, are you that man? Not in theory. In truth, are you willing to be misunderstood? To finally be real? Are you willing to be rejected? To finally be whole? Are you willing to stop being wanted? To finally be free? Because if not, if applause still matters more than truth, then you're not ready. Not yet. But if you are, if your voice is tired of explaining, your soul is tired of waiting, then stand up and meet yourself. Because the world doesn't need more men who know how to be liked. It needs men who know how to be. There's no parade at the end of this road. No fanfare. No finish line. No one clapping in the dark saying, "Congratulations, you made it." What you get is something quieter, something deeper. Silence. But not the silence of rejection. Not the silence of abandonment. The silence of sovereignty. It's the sound of a man who no longer waits, no longer begs, no longer performs, no longer bargains his soul for someone else's affection. This silence is yours. You no longer need to be loved to know you exist. This is the shift from "please love me" to "I am." It's not glamorous. It's not cinematic. It comes with loss. You lose the mask. You lose the applause. You lose the comfort of being someone else's perfect man. But what you gain is weight, not heaviness. Presence. You walk differently. You speak less, but it lands deeper. You stop wondering, "Do they like me?" and start asking, "Am I real right now?" You don't chase beauty. You recognize it. You don't need women to complete you. You invite them to meet you if they can stand beside your fire without shrinking. And if they can't, you let them go. Not in anger, in reverence, because the man you've become was forged in silence, not applause. Carl Jung once said, "The man who looks outside dreams. The man who looks inside awakens." And now, you've awakened, not into perfection, not into power, but into reality. You're not untouchable. You're not invincible. You're not above pain, but you are untamed. You carry your own fire now. You don't light it for others to see. You let it burn because it's yours. And in that burn, you become the kind of man no illusion can seduce. Because you've stopped seducing yourself. And the world, it won't understand you. They'll call you intense, too too quiet, too different. But you don't flinch anymore, because when you've come home to your own soul, you stop asking for directions from people who've never left the script. So, if you've made it here not just to the end of this story, but to the edge of your own reflection, take a breath. Not to calm down, but to remember yourself. Because the man who breathes here is not a product, not a performance, not a projection. He's real, alive, present, and finally free. And in that freedom, you stop looking for love as a life raft. You start offering love as overflow. You don't need her gaze to feel like a man. You don't need her praise to feel worthy. You don't need her fear to feel powerful. You carry yourself now. And in doing so, you become something sacred. Not chosen, but true.